As we know, the cheviac isn't running as good as it used to run or as good as it can run. So I'm going to test it all out and see what's wrong with it. Bought a couple treats for it. One, I've already installed 8 brand new AC spark plugs. And the next problem is the gas tank is full of rust inside, so it keeps clogging up the fuel filter that's built into the front of the carburetor. So unfortunately I had to keep it running, so I ripped a little tear into the old fuel filter after knocking out all the crud. And now I'm going to have to take that old Rochester 4-barrel apart and get some dirt out of it. Another reason why General Motors cars sort of die out when you step on them is the rotor can be going bad because they burn microscopic pinholes through them and arc out to the counterweights which advance it. And another reason can be bad ignition wires, so I'll get my meter and test the resistance on each one. And then we'll see how good this thing can run. It does have good compression on all the cylinders. Recently I've also replaced the clutch fan with a flex blade fan because the clutch fan blew up. And I put the radiator in from the Molesville that I scrapped last year because this one doesn't leak and the other one had hit the fan and chewed itself all up. So, that's where the fuel filter is. Of course, rotor's under there. Spark plugs are already done. So, next step isn't that difficult until I get into that bitch. Okay, distributor cap is upside down now. And I've got the old rotor off. Looks really old. You can see all those patterns forming in there. That's corona patterns from high voltage, so it's forming hot spots. It could be arcing. Of course, that's what it's supposed to look like. Well, when you get this off, that's where the rotor sat. Just check your springs for your advance weights. Make sure everything returns. Sometimes these little pins that these pivot on seize up. Sometimes springs are broke. It advances too quick. And then every time you accelerate, your engine has a heavy pinging sound. You have your little green and yellow wire there. They go to your ECM. They go to the reluctor coil, and when this thing moves for advance, it sometimes breaks those wires off, and that's why one day you're driving your GM car, then all of a sudden, boop, it shuts off and you can't get it restarted and there's no spark. It's not that hard to fix. Also check in there. That one looked really good. I just took a paper towel and took off the carbon dust. It's also a good idea to make your cars run better is to clean the outside of the distributor cap. If they collect dirt and oil, then dirt conducts electricity, and then sometimes they can arc between posts or down the side. Well, that's back on. If you want to test if your vacuum advance is working, well, that diaphragm, you just unplug the vacuum hose going to it, plug any kind of vacuum hose on it you want, stick it in your mouth and suck when the cap is off, and you can see the rotor move a few degrees. And then you leave suction on the tube with your tongue and hold it and see if it holds suction. It should hold suction indefinitely. If the suction just bleeds away quickly, well, then the diaphragm has a tiny leak. You won't notice much problem driving your car, except you won't have as much performance. It'll have a slower idle and worse fuel economy. Well, now I got the wires off the cap, but they're still attached to that plastic thing so I don't lose their firing order, even though the firing order for small block Chevys is 184366572. And I've got my ohm meter out there to measure resistance. So I've got number 1 unplugged, probe in there, probe in the other end, and we're getting a reading of 10.47 K, 10,470 ohms. That's not great. I consider a wire good if it's under 12 K, but that's not great. New wires have a reading anywhere from, for example, 3,000 ohms to say 6,000 ohms. Good thing I've got some spare old wires hanging around in case I've had any worse than that, so now I've got 7 more to check. Of course, your wires can still be bad because the insulation is bad. You can't measure that with a meter, but you know that's bad because if a little bit of wetness, fog, or dampness gets on them and your car misfires, well, then your wires are bad even if the reading's perfect. Longer wires always read higher than shorter wires. That's just because they're resistor core. So this is a shorter one, so it's reading 7.17, so I'll consider that one quite good. Well, now for the fuel filter, which is right there. And you should be using a line wrench. You hold this big one still, and then you crack this one loose with a line wrench that grips it better. But I didn't happen to have one at the farm, so I used a vice grip and it worked fine. If you don't use that, you can twist the hose off because everything will turn together, especially if you try to move that one first. Well, she's out, and that filter looks horrible, and you can see at least one of those little holes I tore in it. Now there is a right and a wrong way to go in. The hole goes towards the opening there, and of course that goes in that way. You put them in the opposite way and the thing just doesn't run, no fuel flow. Next step, now that the fuel filter is out and I know I have a rusty tank inside, is sometimes with these old mechanical fuel pumps, but you can't take them apart and clean them. They have, of course, 2 rubber valves on springs, and that's how they work, and then a big diaphragm. Well, little flakes of rust get caught in between where the rubber seats, and you don't get full suction or full compression of pushing the fuel out. And so I'll have this guy, he needs a job, give him a job, turn in the key for me and see if it squirts fuel at a good amount, and that's telling me that at least I know if I reassemble everything it has more problems. It'll be inside the carburetor. Okay, you don't have to touch the gas pedal. It won't start because I've got the big red wire and distributor unhooked, so there's no spark for safety reasons. So I'm out of the way, I'm clear, crankage. Uh-oh. Again? Oh, that's good. Okay. Yeah, she's flowing really good. Fuel's not as orange as I thought considering the rust, but that's probably just from sitting and settling down. Okay, good. Back to boiling water. With his...
my rocket stove.
His new homemade stove. He steps it for a coffee. Oh, I mean to wash the dishes this time, not coffee, right?
I'm just trying it out.
Oh, okay. When you have your fuel filter holder out, always make sure before you put it back in that that little plastic nylon gasket's still on it. They fall off and you don't even know. They could be on the ground. And you wonder why no matter how tight you make this thing, it still leaks. And of course, there's the crossover pipe that warms your carburetor up. The exhaust passes through on these manifolds, and that gets pretty hot. And there's a possibility your engine could light on fire if it's slowly seeping fuel and you're driving and you don't know it. Now that I got the top off this quadra junk, of course it's full of crud. You can see it all down there in the bowl. And one more problem was this little power valve thing here. It's got a little, like a little brass piston was seized up in that little hole, so I had to work that out. Now I've got to blow it all out. That's the thing I'm talking about. I'll have to steel wool it down and make it work nice and freely. So it's all back together now. It's too tedious to try to film putting one of these things back together. Plus, unfortunately, the main top gasket is broken in 3 pieces. So I hope that doesn't make it run worse. It was already kind of broken and now it's more broken. But so we don't have too much crankage and pumpage to start this up. Almost every carburetor has some sort of vent thing on it. And you can just fill them up and that pre-fills the bowl so that the carb is full like it was just running. And it'll fire up perfect. Yeah, see, it's full. It's coming out the overflow. It used to go to the charcoal vent canister thing. I didn't change any spark plug wires. They all tested out under 11,000 ohms. I didn't change anything else except for the fuel filter and the rotor and the spark plugs a month ago. So let's see if she runs any different. Of course, this thing's always been a bit cold-blooded, having no back pressure and a dirty carb. Why not some pumpage for the hell of it? Little choke. Little less choke. Less than 1 minute later, it's running perfect. The motor's still cold. It's just a slightly bent secondary lifting on the floor. They were staying open a bit. I'll warm it up a bit more. We'll go for a drive. But she seems to rev nice without dying anyways. Sounds better than ever. Now let's just hope I can punch it and jam it and slam it. And I got that roof a bit pushed up, so I hope I don't get wet pants this time. And I got my new windshield to stop the mud, the blood, the sweat, and the beer from getting in here. Very responsive. Never stalls. Like, it's never been before like that. Maybe even Rick will be able to start it and drive it now without it stalled.